So I'm assuming that we all believe that the Cavaliers are the best team in the Eastern Conference and they're going to go on to the NBA Finals this season. So it is entirely possible that everything I say in this video will not mean anything, because if the seedings in the East maintain themselves now, then Toronto would face Cleveland in round 2 and that would be the end of their season. But I think this stuff is worth talking about anyway. So I have a question. Are the Toronto Raptors secretly the second best team in the East, potentially over the Boston Celtics? I am a Celtics fan, so I hope that's not the case. But when we talk about Toronto a bit, they're doing some things this season, man. Their offense has been more fluid, more passes, less isolations, and I think it's worth diving into. And we will start with those assists. This season, the Toronto Raptors are averaging 23.5 assists a game, which is 4th in the NBA. And if we look at just last season, they were dead last in the NBA at 18.5. So 5 more baskets are being scored for them each game just off of extra passes. So that's a good thing. I've looked at some of their highlights and they've done some creative things. I've seen a couple plays where they've had like DeRozan screening for Lowry, or they even had Lowry screening for DeRozan, which was pretty creative stuff. Serge Ibaka seems like he has at least a little bit more ability as a ball handler this season. A big criticism that you could have thrown at him for pretty much his whole career is sometimes he's completely useless off the dribble. And he still isn't like Draymond Green levels or even halfway to Draymond Green levels. But it seems like he's at least a little better, which is a good thing. Should also give some credit to DeMar DeRozan, who's having his best playmaking season of his career, where he's up to about 5 assists a game. I've noticed times where he's just been a little better at recognizing where the help defense is coming from and where he needs to go to get it to an open shooter. Toronto also has themselves a decent chunk of shooters along the perimeter this season. Between OG Anunoby, Kyle Lowry, CJ Miles, Serge Ibaka, and Van Fleet, and Powell takes about 3.5 a game, but he's shooting under league average. But they have quite a few guys who can hoist it up. Their 3-point attempts are way up this season. They are attempting 32 threes a game. Last season they attempted 24. I think there's a direct correlation between more assists and more three-pointers made. I think the acquisition of CJ Miles also has a big thing to do with it as well, because DeMarre Carroll's three-point shooting wasn't that good for Toronto. But it also seems like there is just a real thing that's been established by Dwayne Casey here, where he's saying, we got to move the ball more, guys, and they're definitely doing that, so that's good. They're also down by about 2 isolations a game this season, based on 2017 to this year, which might not sound like a whole lot, but I mean, the combination of everything, like less ISOs, more assists, more three-point attempts, that's the way you want to do it. They are also playing just way faster this season. They are averaging about 98 possessions a game. Last season, they averaged about 94.5. So there really is like a concerted effort to run the break. I think Pascal Siakam may have been the one who established that, because that dude sprints to the other side of the floor every opportunity he gets, and then I think it's carried over to the rest of the team, because they're committing, or they're forcing about the same amount of turnovers that they were last season, but they have way more fast break points this year. So it seems like they're just saying, screw it, we're just going to run more. And it seems to be working well. Last season they had about 12 fast break points a game. This season they're up to 14.5, and I wouldn't be shocked if that kept on going. And if we're just looking at their team, I mean, I don't think there's any one guy who's just shooting like way better than he normally does throughout his career. So I don't have a reason to really expect that this is going to fall off for them. And if anything, I could expect Norman Powell's three-pointer to be a little better this season. So Toronto's idea of just improving the offense through ball movement and three-pointers, it's definitely working out. Defensively, they've also been really good, 9th in the league at 106 points allowed per 100. I think a lot of this is just because they're inserting more good defensive players, like Anunoby's good, Powell is playing, I think he's playing a little bit more than he usually does in his career, a tad higher, but yeah, I mean, he's good for, 20 minutes a game of defense. Jakob Poeltl has been pretty decent as a backup big. Pascal Siakam's good. Serge Ibaka, while he's not what he once was athletically and as a weak side shot blocker, he's still a pretty smart defender and he can move well enough to where it works out. Now you still have the Valanciunas problem, but they've been using a lot of lineups where Valanciunas just isn't really in there. And it seems to be working out pretty well. There's an all-bench lineup where he's not in there. There's lineups where Ibaka and Siakam are the two front court guys. That lineup's playing well, and Valanciunas does not play there. They've also been using Siakam and Nogueira, and that lineup's been good. So any ways that you can kind of get Valanciunas off the floor when his lack of defense is going to kill you, that's good. I also think playing Valanciunas less minutes, which Dwayne Casey has done, is good. He's playing about 20 minutes a game. I think a lot of their big guys should be kind of on like that sort of a rotation, with Ibaka probably playing the most minutes, and then between Poeltl, Valanciunas, Siakam, kind of be a case-by-case basis, I guess. So I like the idea of that. They aren't really going with a Lowry and bench lineup anymore, because that was the thing that they used last season that was so good. But I mentioned before, this all-bench lineup that they have with Fred Van Vliet, or Fleet, I don't know the exact pronunciation, but he's been the one doing a lot of the ball handling in those lineups, and he's a pretty damn good backup point guard. His playmaking is something. He averages 3 assists and less than 1 turnover a game, so that's pretty cool. He seems to do a good job of just getting into the paint, forcing the defense to make tough decisions, but he's also been an okay enough three-point shooter. So I like Toronto quite a bit. The question is, could they have something against the Celtics? Well, while I do have to give Dwayne Casey credit for just being a pretty damn solid coach for the first 43 minutes of the game, when the Raptors played the Celtics maybe about 2 weeks ago at this point, their offense in the last 5 minutes was all DeMar DeRozan isolations, and I don't think that sort of thing is going to work against Brad Stevens and that Celtics defense, because, it's a really smart defense full of versatile defensive players, and if you're just going to allow them to just go up against ISOs, it's not going to be that difficult, Now, if you could force, Kyrie Irving onto DeMar DeRozan first through a switch, and then you go to DeRozan ISOs, I like that idea a lot more, no doubt. But hopefully there's just more dynamic stuff late in games, because that's been my criticism of Dwayne Casey for a while, because besides that, everything else is going pretty damn well. They're top 10 on both sides of the floor. The offense is way more dynamic than it's ever been, and they've had a decent amount of roster turnover, and they've just been plugging guys in, and there's been little adjustments here and there in terms of lineups, but for the most part, they've been A-okay. They're 16-7 right now. Now, one player who I do think could end up being even better for them as this year goes along and they experiment with lineups would be CJ Miles, because it seems like they've already tried him at the small ball 4 a little bit. There's one specific lineup they have where it's Anunoby, CJ, Poeltl, Van Fleet, and then Darrell Wright. Or DeLon Wright, I should say. Between those 5 guys, well, maybe Anunoby would be the small ball 4 because he's 6'8". I guess, can either one of those two play small ball 4? Anunoby, CJ Miles. Could you unlock some sort of lineup where it's Lowry, DeRozan, Anunoby, CJ Miles, and then Ibaka to have a smaller, quicker lineup with a lot of shooting out there? Or you could have Norman Powell at the 3 and then Anunoby at the 4, or CJ at the 4. And then maybe even Siakam at the 5 sometimes, you know? I mean, he doesn't give you the shooting that Ibaka does, but he might give you more defense, and he'll definitely give you more athleticism. So those are just some things that I think they could explore as the year goes along. But yeah, I'll tell you, as a Celtics fan, the Raptors scare me. I think the team itself scares me. Dwayne Casey does not scare me as much because even with all this stuff, it's still the, are the lineups, is the entire game plan just going to become super basic in the last 5 minutes of the game? That's just the big question with Casey, you know? If I had to make a pick, though, I would still pick the Celtics as the second best team because of Brad Stevens, but Toronto's good, no doubt.